August 30th, 1813, Fort Mims, Alabama, 11 a.m. The Creek Nation is out for blood. The red-painted bodies of hundreds of warriors are pressed into the earth, awaiting the signal to attack. These men have hidden since sunrise, intending to kill every person they can. They conceal themselves in a valley 400 yards outside the new log walls surrounding the sprawling plantation of Samuel Mims. More than 600 men, women, and children live inside the month-old fort, located 35 miles north of Mobile. They are comprised of white settlers, Negro slaves, and mixed-race Indians who have adopted white ways. Almost all of them have just hours to live. The Indian force numbers somewhere between 700 and 1,000. Some are not Native American at all, but African slaves who have escaped and joined the Creeks. The warriors are naked, save for a loincloth to which a red-painted cow's tail has been tied at the back. Some wear an owl feather, believing it will give them improved vision. Each warrior has forced himself to drink a strong emetic that has made him vomit, again in the belief that this will prevent infection if he is stabbed or shot. Every fighter is armed with a flintlock rifle as well as a bow and iron-tipped arrows. Their most lethal killing weapon is a 2-foot-long war stick carved from dense wood. Almost every man carries one. They have been trained countless hours with these war clubs and wield their cudgels with the same finesse shown by master swordsmen. Like the Indians' torsos, each club is painted red. The Creek warriors have waited days and marched in complete stealth for miles, determined to remain unseen and attack with complete surprise. They know the precise moment at which they will attack. They have studied the routines of the fort and are aware that the settlers gather each day for a noon meal. A dinner bell is a signal to come together. On this morning, the dinner bell, which signifies lunch, will also be the signal to attack. The Creeks struggle to remain motionless. Insects crawl over their prone bodies. Mosquitoes bite their hands and faces. Beads of sweat sting their eyes as the day grows warmer and the air more humid. The Creeks' intent is murder. However, their ultimate goal is survival, for they believe that only a mass slaughter will prevent intruders from stealing the Creek ancestral homeland. Just one more hour until the lunch bell clangs. Inside Fort Mims, a slave belonging to Josiah Fletcher is being tied to a whipping post. He is stripped to the waist. There is no shade here in the center of the fort, and sweat runs down the man's bare flesh. He hears the murmurs of the crowd gathering in a circle around the pole, eager to witness his suffering. The slave presses his body into the rough wood, his torso tense to absorb 100 lashes. Incredibly, the slave's only crime is telling the truth. Yesterday, while working outside the walls, he saw some Creek warriors gathering in the forest. But when he raced back inside to sound a warning, the slave was accused of lying and spreading fear. In the eyes of Fort Mims military leadership, this is a crime that must be punished. Few men can survive 100 lashes. The slave is sure he will die on this spot, bound helplessly to this pole. Major Daniel Beasley of the Mississippi Volunteers holds the whip, eager to administer the lash. Beasley is 45 and just shy of 6 feet tall. Women normally consider him attractive, but this morning Beasley's face is red and puffy, his eyes bloodshot. Even after a stiff drink of whiskey to start the day, Beasley's head throbs from a long night of sucking down alcohol from the fresh barrel that arrived just yesterday. It is the job of the major and his 170 militiamen to protect those seeking refuge in Fort Mims. There have been rumors of Indian sightings for more than 2 weeks. Major Beasley and his men responded immediately in the beginning, but as day after day passed without an attack, he came to no longer consider those warnings credible. The major is so sure that the slave is lying about the Indians, he has not even bothered to send his men out into the forest to investigate. Yet even as the young black man is bound to the post, There is evidence he is telling the truth. Just an hour ago, a local farmer galloped his horse into the fort, also warning that Creek warriors were nearby. Jim Cornell specifically asked to speak with Major Beasley, then informed him that he had personally seen Indians in the forest. The 25-year-old Cornell is himself of mixed race, the son of a young Indian woman and a British father. His farm was recently burned to the ground by a group of Creek warriors nicknamed the Red Sticks, so called for the brightly painted color of their war weapons. Cornell suffers from a disfigurement known as yaws, common to this humid climate. His condition leaves his face covered with lesions and the skin stretched back on his head, making it difficult for him to speak clearly. This combination of heritage and horrible disfigurement makes Cornell's very presence a source of discomfort to Beasley. You've only seen a gang of red cattle, the major insists, his speech so thick that Cornell will later insist Beasley is drunk. Those red cattle will give you one hell of a kick before night, Cornell responds, still astride his horse. And enraged, Beasley orders his men to arrest the farmer, but Cornell's is too fast. He quickly gallops from the fort straight in to the waiting Creek army. Watching from a hiding place in the woods, the Creek leader, William Weatherford, sees Cornell's race away from the fort. Weatherford is in his mid-30s. He is 6'2" and known for his handsome looks, extreme bravery, and dark black eyes. Killing the farmer would spoil the element of surprise, so the warrior leader lets him pass. Yet as the rider goes by, Weatherford notices that no one has bothered to close the east gate to Fort Mims. He is stunned at this incredible lapse in security. William Weatherford's mother is from a prominent branch of the Creek Nation known as the Wind Clan, while his father was a Scottish plantation owner named Charles Weatherford, who had a reputation for debauchery. However, the Creeks believe that the line of descent goes through the maternal side. Thus, Weatherford's loyalty belongs not to his European ancestors, but to his Native American brothers and sisters. This devotion is so strong that the fair-skinned Weatherford, who is just 1/8 Creek with light brown hair, likes to proclaim that he is no white blood at all in his veins. Inside the fort, another mixed-blood Creek named Richard Dixon Bailey is actually in charge of security. Like Weatherford's, Bailey's mother also hails from the Wind Clan. Just a few weeks ago, at a conflict known as the Battle of Burnt Corn, a group of warriors smuggling arms north from Florida was ambushed by a contingent of Mississippi militia. The Creek rallied after the initial surprise, and the battle ended in a draw. But spotted among the militia was Dixon Bailey, leading the attack against his own flesh and blood. In his youth, the squat and thick-set Bailey was sent off to Philadelphia to be educated and has completely absorbed the life of the white man. He now owns a prospering plantation a few miles from the Mims property, where he lives with his wife and many children. Unlike Weatherford, who can pass for white, Bailey is dark-skinned but considers the whites to be his true people. In the mind of William Weatherford, the betrayal by Bailey, who now wears the U.S. military rank of captain, is just another reason for attacking Fort Mims. If Weatherford is sure of anything on this day, it is that Captain Richard Dixon Bailey will pay a dear price for his lack of loyalty to his Indian heritage. William Weatherford and Dixon Bailey exemplify all that is wrong in the Creek Nation right now. For 3 centuries, the Creek have endured the advance of white settlers onto their lands. It was in 1536 when Spanish explorer Hernando de Soto led his army north from the Gulf of Mexico, systematically looting villages and enslaving the Native American population in his relentless search for gold. At the time, there was no such thing as the Creek Nation. Tribes in the areas that would come to be known as Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia were separate and independent, but bonded by a complex political alliance that prevented warfare with one another. It was only when the British arrived in the region in the early 1700s that the name Creek was given to the population of 10,000 Indians living in the Deep South. The name is a shortened version of, quote, the Indians living on the Oches Creek, and soon caught on. At the time, the bond between the British settlers and the Creek was economic. In exchange for goods such as cloth and guns, the Indians provided deer skins that were shipped to England for the manufacture of gloves and riding breeches. The Creek coexisted peacefully with the British, but they regularly raided other Indian tribes in Florida to capture slaves. Most were women and children, who were then sold to the French, Dutch, and British for use on the sugar plantations of the West Indies and the coastal tobacco farms of Virginia and South Carolina. But just as the sale of deer hides came to an end when the forests were depleted from overhunting, so the Indian slave trade ended as tribes either moved to distant locations or were simply wiped out. In the southern part of North America, it was the Spanish who first came to steal the land from indigenous peoples. In the East, the British and French did it. It was soldiers of those nations who first navigated the new territories. Fur traders then opened up commerce. Farmers came last, with their hoes and cattle, felling trees to open up acreage for planting and grazing. For the last 200 and more years, this desire for land has created unabated conflict between white European settlers and Native American tribes, and with every clash have come massacres and atrocities. In 1622, the Powhatan tribe murdered 347 settlers in the colony of Virginia. 15 years later, on the shores of what is now Long Island Sound, British loyalists surrounded a village of the Pequot tribe and murdered 700 men, women, and children with musket, sword, and flames. At the end of the War of Independence, a new people, simply known as Americans, continued to push westward, not caring that the land they required for farms and homes was not their own. American expansion was a result of either making peace or subduing Indian tribes through armed conflict. The process was often decades in the making, but the Native Americans almost always lost. In this way, the Americans advanced slowly westward across the continent, building cities, roads, and military outposts, even as the Indians retreated. One Indian chief, Tecumseh, whose headquarters was located in a small northern border town known as Detroit, tried to halt the white man's intrusion. He attempted to organize all of the Indian nations from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico, traveling thousands of miles on horseback to forge alliances. The attack on Fort Mims is taking place in 1813, but its genesis was 2 years before, in the summer of 1811, when the charismatic Shawnee chief traveled south from Detroit to meet with the Creek leadership, among them William Weatherford. Lending a celestial aura to Tecumseh's arrival was a mighty comet that shone in the nighttime sky. The chief preached that the Indians should turn their backs on farming and return to hunting and other traditional ways of life. His primary goal, however, was to form an Indian alliance that would stem the westward advance of the whites. True to his word, Tecumseh soon returned to a place known as the Indiana Territory to wage war in the United States. Utilizing an alliance of tribes from the Great Lakes region, he battled to stop the whites' migration. But inevitably, the growing power of the new nation, America, overwhelmed the Indian chief. Under President James Madison, General William Henry Harrison was ordered to destroy Tecumseh's forces in Indiana. Harrison was successful, defeating Tecumseh at the Battle of Tippecanoe in 1811. Yet Tecumseh's dream of stopping the whites' westward advance lived on. William Weatherford and the fierce warriors surrounding Fort Mims are now vivid proof. In the Deep South, white settlers and some blacks who had successfully fled slavery actually began living among the Creeks. Some even intermarried with the Indians. This diluted not just the bloodline, but also simple traditions, such as personal identity. This is why the Creek attack on this sweltering August morning is led by a warrior with the given name William Weatherford, who not only speaks fluent English, but has also been a regular visitor to the house of Samuel Mims, the same plantation home that will soon burn to the ground in a few hours. To Weatherford's dismay, a segment of the tribe known as the Lower Creek is in favor of continued assimilation with the whites. They want to be farmers, speaking English, living in towns similar to the Americans, and wearing the same clothing. One prime example of this group is the mixed-race militia captain, Dixon Bailey. The Upper Creek, of which Weatherford is a member, seek a return to traditional ways and actively attempt to expel whites from their lands. Their strategy is simple: kill any Creek who is friendly to the Americans and follow up that violence by slaughtering all the white people they can. Rather than the ungainly term Upper Creek, they prefer to be known as Red Stick. The result is civil war within the Creek Nation. Caught in the conflict are all nearby inhabitants. In the summer of 1813, it becomes necessary to build a series of forts in which settlers can shelter until the Creek War ends. American soldiers are also ordered into southern Mississippi and Alabama. Rather than the regular army, which is currently busy fighting the British in what will become known as the War of 1812, a volunteer force is assembled. Each man signs a 12-month commitment before marching off to stop the Red Stick aggression. Construction of Fort Mims, as the protective barrier around the plantation is now known, began 1 month ago in July 1813. From all around the region, scores of families fled their farms and homes and traveled to the fort in search of protection. 5 acres in size, it is situated on a high plain overlooking the Alabama River. Those sheltered are hard people, driven by poverty and ambition. They have chosen to make their living in an unremitting land full of poisonous snakes, where the rivers are filled with alligators, and the distinction between friend and foe has grown vague. All of this so they can live on a plot of land they can call their own. So, as they come together at Fort Mims in an attempt to preserve their way of life, these families work as a team to chop down acres of long-leaf pine trees, erect walls, and construct their new homes within the fort. All labor side by side. It is hard work by day, but dancing, drinking, and merriment by night. They have brought with them their cows, pigs, and sheep, which are left to roam free in the pines and canebrake beyond the walls. Dozens of small children play in the midst of the construction. A well within the fort provides fresh water, though, unlike the Creek Indians, who bathe each morning in the local streams and rivers, these settlers do not practice daily hygiene and are largely unwashed. So many hundreds of people have come to Fort Mims seeking refuge that there is little room for personal space. This claustrophobia is made worse by the shortage of outhouses for private routines and a growing rate of disease borne by thick clouds of mosquitoes. In this way, the fortress has the feel of a small, doomed city. Now, as the hoofbeats of Jim Cornell's galloping horse fade into the distance, William Weatherford and his warriors lie in wait. Though his bravery is undisputed, Weatherford's fair skin and close ties with the whites have some doubting whether or not he truly believes in the Red Stick cause. Weatherford is charismatic and courageous and possesses a deep knowledge of the terrain around Fort Mims. But the doubts about his true loyalty still bring forth suspicion. Thus, he is allowed to lead the men into battle, but has not yet been named a chief. The coming attack, however, offers Weatherford the perfect opportunity to prove his allegiance. He continues staring at the gate to Fort Mims, which still remains open. From somewhere inside the fort, Weatherford hears a fiddle playing, but that is not the signal to attack. The Red Stick must wait for the lunch bell. With the east gate propped open and the noon meal drawing near, William Weatherford and his warriors grasp their war clubs tighter, eager to swing the blows that will cave in the skulls of their enemy. Major Beasley and a Mississippi militia arrive at Fort Mims on August 2nd. Beasley's men immediately go to work, fortifying a simple wall built by the settlers. A stockade of inner defensive walls is added, as well as a new addition to the fort built specifically to house the military. Gun ports are cut into the perimeter fencing, allowing Beasley's men to shoot without exposing themselves to danger. Within weeks, what was once a collection of homes and stables is completely fenced in by logs placed in the ground vertically, the top sharpened to a point. In the event of an attack, a blockhouse allows a stout enclosure into which the defenders can retreat and then open fire. The fort was built in a hurry, with an undercurrent of fear permeating every movement of construction. But now the walls are complete. A calm settles over Fort Mims. Where once there was just open space, there is now protection. The walls and the substantial military presence makes the fort's inhabitants feel safe for the first time in months. To keep his men happy, Major Beasley recently sent a letter by courier requesting that his militia superiors send whiskey with which to reward the men, the very whiskey that many of them drank to excess last night. Beasley also requested a drum. To Major Beasley's delight, Martin Rigdon, a 17-year-old who has served in the Army since he was 9, turns out to be an excellent drummer. Beasley himself is a lawyer by trade. He only became a professional soldier to advance his standing in society and has no formal military training. But the Major believes that the regular beating of a drum will bring a stronger military bearing to Fort Mims. Like the whiskey, the drum arrived yesterday. Now Martin Rigdon and his drum stand just a few feet from Beasley, who will not commence the whipping without a proper drum beat. The Major clutches the lash in his fist. The slave tenses. The circle of witnesses presses in closer. The soldiers standing guard are playing cards and telling stories. The east gate remains wide open. Beasley nods. The rat-a-tat drum roll echoes through the thick morning air, carrying across the fort's manicured grounds and far beyond the brand new walls smelling of fresh pine, into the woods. The Creek decide to wait no longer. The drum roll now marks their signal to attack. The Red Stick rise from their hiding places without a war cry, sprinting toward the fort's two entrances in complete silence. By the hundreds, they race across open ground from the south, east, and west. Now, it is time to kill. 200 warriors led by Weatherford focus their attack on the east gate. It is vital that they get there before being spotted, before the gate can be closed. Suddenly, a sentry cries, "Indians!" He immediately fires a warning, then runs for his life, making no attempt to shut the east gate. Major Beasley drops his whip. Drawing a sword, he rushes for the outer walls, hoping to beat the Indians to the open eastern gateway. But just as he reaches the gate, Beasley is shot dead. The Indians swarm, beating his head repeatedly with clubs, leaving the Major's corpse bloody and unrecognizable. The Creek poured through the open eastern entrance. One woman will remember seeing Billy Weatherford as he came in the gate at a full run at the head of his warriors. To this, she would add, quote, "As he sprang over the logs, he saw Dixon Bailey, who was a bitter enemy, to who he shouted, 'Dixon Bailey, today, one or both of us must die.'" At the same time, a second body of warriors raced toward the western entrance of the fort. With few exceptions, they were naked. One survivor of the attack will remember. Around the waist was drawn a girdle with a cowtail running down the back and almost dragging on the ground. It is impossible to imagine people so horribly painted. Settlers are scalped, dead or alive, but many blacks are not killed. Instead, they are captured, soon to become Indian slaves. The man tied to the whipping post is not so lucky. The massacre is intense and unrelenting. In an act of desperation, a young scout named Cornet Rankin marches towards the Indians carrying a white flag of surrender. He is shot dead. Through the screaming of terrified women and children and the hail of bullets, the Mississippi volunteers somehow manage to regroup. The Red Stick attack stalls just inside the east gate, the newly built inner wall preventing them from penetrating into the center of the fort. On the south wall, soldiers fire through specially designed portholes with deadly accuracy, causing the Indian attack to fall back. On the north wall, Captain Dixon Bailey's men turned back the Creek advance, firing their single-shot muskets with deadly accuracy. During construction of the fort, brush and trees were cleared for 100 yards in every direction, allowing an unbroken field of fire for the Americans. Indian bodies now lie across the plain, including those of several shamans who chose to wear bulletproof deerskin. Many Creeks, however, survived the barrage and reached the fort's walls. With Indians on one side of the portholes and militia on the other, the two sides literally take turns firing at one another through the same openings, just inches away. Slowly, however, the Americans fall back into the center of the fort. Panicked women and children are ordered to find a building and go inside away from the fight, and refuse, preferring to remain with their men, loading guns, drawing water from the well to put out fires, and bandaging the wounded. Help or hope there was none. One account written shortly after the battle will read, "Soldiers, women, children, Spaniards, friendly Indians fell together in heaps. The dying and the dead, scalped, mutilated, wounded, bloody, to be consumed long by fire or to become food for hungry dogs and buzzards." So it is that the dead and dying cover the ground inside and outside Fort Mims. As the second hour of fighting comes to an end, many small buildings within the fort are ablaze. But the fight remains at a standstill. The Creek cannot penetrate the fort's inner walls and thus content themselves with looting the outer buildings, even as the defenders hunker down inside the blockhouse and small homes at the center of the fort. The battle appears to be a stalemate. For 2 hours, the Creek tend to their wounded, unsure of whether to leave with their captured slaves or to once more risk their lives in battle. But there is one act that must be avenged: Dixon Bailey's betrayal against his people at the Battle of Burnt Corn. Until Bailey is dead, the fight cannot end. William Weatherford longs to see Dixon Bailey killed for his treachery, but he's also friends with many whites still trapped inside and cannot bear to witness what will come next. So he departs the battlefield. He will later tell his sister-in-law, quote, "He rode off, for he had not the heart to witness what he knew would follow, to wit, the indiscriminate slaughter of the inmates of the fort." The final confrontation begins with the launching of a single flaming arrow. The hardwood of the longleaf pine, from which every building is constructed, is known to burn at a tremendously high heat. First ablaze is the kitchen, a standalone structure. The fire quickly spreads to the compound of stables and workshops surrounding the Mims home. More fire arrows follow, and soon the Indians are penetrating the fort's inner defenses and setting every structure ablaze. Frantic settlers seek to chop holes in the outer fences, hoping to escape the deadly chaos. Those trapped inside the burning structures face the agonizing decision between being burned alive or being scalped. Captain Dixon Bailey and his men still control the north wall, even as his brother James and sister Elizabeth have made the fatal decision to retreat to the Mims home. There, the root cellar is packed with children. As Indians enter the blazing home, James Bailey is shot dead, while Elizabeth looks on. She could save her own life by feigning loyalty to the Creek, but instead Elizabeth points to her brother's corpse and proclaims, "I am sister to that man you have murdered there." Benjamin Hawkins, a black slave who witnessed the incident before being led away as a Creek hostage, recounts what happens next. Upon which they knocked her down, cut her open, strewed her entrails around, They threw several dead bodies into the fire and some that were wounded. Settlers fleeing the flames are clubbed, shot, stabbed, sliced open with tomahawks, and scalped with special long knives carried for that specific purpose. This includes not just the men and women fighting so desperately to save Fort Mims, but their infants and young children as well. The last holdout is the North Wall, where Dixon Bailey still fights. When they can take it no more, Bailey flees out of a hole hacked into the base of the North Wall. His wife and 4 children escape with him. Bailey's son, Ralph, unable to walk because he's wounded, is carried by a black slave named Tom. Despite a hail of bullets and arrows, the group makes it to the nearby woods before Bailey is shot down. He dies in a small grove of trees and is later buried in a mass grave, along with his wife, his children, and the hundreds of other victims of the Creek Massacre. It seems, however, that at least one of Dixon Bailey's offspring will survive. The slave Tom attempts to negotiate for the life of 14-year-old Ralph Bailey, hoping to offer both of them up as prisoners. But when Tom hands the boy over, the Creek immediately smash in his skull and take his scalp. Tom, meanwhile, is directed to join the group of slaves who have been taken captive. William Weatherford, who could not bear to witness the final carnage, has had his revenge, but at a great cost. By evening, the battle is done. 247 bodies are counted when a relief party finally arrives 10 days later. One eyewitness puts it this way: at the east gate of the stockade lay Indians, Negroes, men, women, and children in one promiscuous ruin. Within the gate lie the brave and fortunate Beasley. He was behind the same and was killed, as was said, in attempting to shut it. On the left, within the stockade, we found 45 men, women, and children in one heap. They were stripped of their clothing without distinction of age or sex. All were scalped, and the females of every age were most barbarously and savage-like butchered in a manner in which decency nor language can convey. Women pregnant were cut open and their children's heads tomahawked. The victims are unrecognizable from heat, decomposition, and the ravages of wild dogs, insects, crows, and buzzards. In addition to those bodies littering this plain overlooking the Alabama River, many more dead have been incinerated inside the burning buildings, the flames so hot that nothing more than ashes is left of these men, women, and children. The exact toll is impossible to count, but it is estimated that almost 500 settlers have been killed by the Creeks at Fort Mims. Adding to the carnage, the Indians continued their rampage in the days and weeks that followed, riding through the countryside to burn homes and slaughter thousands of cattle. Both sides suffered in the Battle of Fort Mims. More than 100 Creek also lie dead. But to this day, the fight marks the greatest Indian victory over Americans in U.S. history. The night after the massacre, a lone rider gallops away from St. Stephen's, a trading post 7 miles west of Fort Mims. 19-year-old Samuel Edmondson is bound for the city of Nashville, 450 miles north. He carries news of the slaughter and 2 letters requesting immediate military assistance. One is addressed to Tennessee Governor Willie Blount. The other is destined for a 46-year-old major general in the Tennessee militia named Andrew Jackson, a volatile plantation owner who's renowned for personal toughness has led his troops to give him the nickname Old Hickory. Edmondson will ride night and day, changing horses as needed, in order to deliver these letters as quickly as possible. The Creeks must be stopped. Thus begins a new chapter of warfare between Indians and settlers. No longer will hostile tribes face isolated enemies. Now, they will be challenging the vast and growing power of the United States of America. It is a challenge the Indians will soon regret.
Chapter 1.